Jeffrey, I want to start with you here.
Yes, sir.
Because there are those who will say, and I think you will say, it's inappropriate for a president to weigh in or get this involved with an investigation.
I will say that.
However, it's not illegal. I mean, there's nowhere in the Constitution that says the president shall not be involved in a Justice Department investigation.
Absolutely not. However, starting with the aftermath of Watergate, when Richard Nixon ordered investigations of people by the IRS, the government established policies so that in individual enforcement investigations, there are specific procedures to be followed between the executive branch, the White House, and the investigative agencies. It is unclear whether these policies were followed precisely or not. The White House counsel is supposed to be involved. The White House counsel appears to have been involved in this process. But the idea that the President of the United States is deciding who is subject to a gag order in an old investigation is just something that's totally inappropriate.
There's some irony here, because listen to the President here. I want to play some sound of the President talking about this. He says it's like Watergate. Listen.
Well, I think the uranium sale to Russia and the way it was done, so underhanded, with tremendous amounts of money being passed, I actually think that's Watergate modern age.
So Jeffrey, if it is like Watergate, what you're saying, the Watergate comparison might be that the executive branch or the president's office is getting involved with an investigation.
Yes, and another part of this story is the symbiosis between the Trump White House and Fox News, because this is a story that has been pushed in recent weeks by Fox News, even though it was settled in 2015. I mean, it's an old story. Everybody knows what happened. But because Fox is using it to distract attention from stories they don't want to cover, that's why the president is suddenly...
Look, yeah, but the president often goes from Fox talking points. We know that. But I don't know that you're right that everybody knows what happened. I mean, I don't know that most Americans do know about Uranium One and what happened here. So I think that revisiting it, in other words, even Hillary Clinton was asked about it again.
Well, she was asked about it because Fox News is talking
of course,
about it.
But let's just listen to what she says, how she explains this. Listen to this.
I would say it's the same baloney they've been peddling for years, and there's been no credible evidence by anyone. In fact, it's been debunked repeatedly and will continue to be debunked.
How do you see it?
This is a transparent attempt to deflect and distract from folks who don't want to deal for partisan purposes with the Russia investigation. And so this is just a counter-narrative, and it has been pushed by Fox, and it has therefore also been embraced by the White House. And then the president trots out this completely historically illiterate metaphor for being the equivalent of Watergate. And really, I think what might happen is the question of White House involvement in some of these sources, because as Jeff pointed out, this is more than simply frowned upon by recent tradition. This is enforced by policy, and there are procedures that probably this White House didn't take into effect. But, you know, the close relationship in terms of messaging between Fox and the White House in really an attempt to change the conversation, to create the illusion of a counter-narrative or something equivalently serious to our country, it is flimsy. It's pathetic. Let's call it what it is, and let's
There's a new element in the Hill reporting. There are some new elements in the Hill reporting, which is that the FBI had been doing an investigation. We don't know if they passed on the information to the State Department and the various agencies when they were approving the uranium.
One of 9, that's an important point.
Yes.
9 agencies approved this. This wasn't Hillary Clinton unilaterally doing something as a favor to the Clinton Foundation.
But it is still confusing, just to say that, you know, all of it is confusing in terms of Russia is good, the president thinks. It would be good to have good relationships with Russia. We've gone overboard with saying Russia's bad, but now Russia's bad with this deal. And, I mean, that's what the president is saying, basically, and this needs to be looked into. The messaging is confusing about how to see this.
Well, the messaging is confusing, but, I mean, this is just a great example of the power of the bully pulpit that the president has, is that when the president of the United States says anything is as bad as Watergate, all of us, more or less, are obliged to cover it because he's the president of the United States and what he says is important, even though this matter of this uranium was investigated when it came out in this Clinton Cash book in 2015. Nobody found anything untoward in terms of the behavior by Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton, you may remember, is now a private citizen in Chappaqua, New York. Why anything about her is particularly relevant today. I mean, it is much more politics than anything.
And also because hating Hillary Clinton is the only thing that keeps the Republican coalition together at this point.
You know, we're also, and I am looking at my watch here, my calendar, you know, we're also nearly a year after this election, and the election continues to be litigated every single day, and there is new information about the Clinton team also, which is not uninteresting.
That
it isn't new. It has to do with the funding of the so-called dossier, the Christopher Steele investigative report. You know, we now have learned that it was, you know, a lawyer for the Democratic Party and Hillary Clinton's campaign that paid for this research. And CNN reporting overnight that campaign chair John Podesta and former DNC chair Debbie Wasserman Schultz were asked, did you know who paid for this? You know, they were asked that by a congressional investigation, and apparently our reporting is they said no.
It's my reporting too that they said no. And you know, I think this has been poorly handled by what's left of the Clinton campaign, because there's nothing wrong with funding opposition research. I mean, this is what campaigns do. This GPS investigation was funded first by Republican opponents of Trump, then picked up by the Clinton campaign. But they simply should have said yes. Or whoever it was in the Clinton campaign who approved it should have said, yes, we paid for it.
The problem is this has been piously denied by the Clinton camp, and that creates the appearance of hypocrisy. But don't forget that we have known for a long time that this appears to have been paid for in two tranches. First, by an anti-Trump Republican, maybe a campaign during the primary, maybe donors associated with the campaign, maybe a third act, and then picked up by the Democrats. So the idea this is a revelation is false, and the idea that somehow solely on the Democrats is also false.
Steele did not come on until after the Democrats started paying. The timeline there is important. Christopher Steele did not start investigating
British intelligence.
British intel. And then Jeffrey, legal counsel there, I just want to make clear. We don't know. It's not impossible that campaign chair John Podesta didn't know who was paying for this. We don't, you know, but if they did know and they told congressional investigators they did not, there's some legal issues.
Oh, sure. If false statements to a congressional committee are a crime, but there really is no evidence that they did know. Someone clearly did know within the Clinton campaign.
Right, but I mean, you're saying somebody would be going rogue and paying all of this money for this opposition research without the campaign managers or the DNC head knowing?
Well, absolutely. I mean, these sorts of decisions are often made at a lower level than that. I mean, it is not necessarily. I mean, he was the campaign chairman. He wasn't the campaign manager. Debbie Wasserman Schultz was completely on the outs with everybody. It's not at all surprising.
Robbie Mook hasn't testified yet. It's very possible that
Robbie Mook should.
When there's opposition research, the candidate rarely knows. Certainly the campaign chairman would know, but the campaign manager usually.
New details emerging about the ambush in Niger that killed those 4 U.S. soldiers. A Nigerian soldier whose unit was first on the scene after the attack, providing a first-hand account of what he witnessed. And CNN's Arwa Damon is the first U.S. correspondent on the ground in Niger, and she joins us now with her exclusive reporting. Arwa.
Good morning, Allison. And this soldier and his unit arrived on scene. They were the first on scene following this horrendous, chilling attack. And he was describing how he saw the remaining surviving American and Nigerian soldiers back-to-back in defensive positions. He said that he was quite impressed by their courage and the fact that they seemed so determined to fight until the very end. And then, of course, tragically, he saw the bodies of 2 U.S. soldiers in the back of an American vehicle. Another 3rd U.S. soldier's body was found very close by, as well as the bodies of 3 Nigerians. He also described how some portions of the landscape were still smoldering, villagers later telling him and his unit that it was in fact the attackers that had set portions of the brush on fire to create a smoke screen so that they could escape. How the attack unfolded, it seems as if initially it was carried out by 8 vehicles that managed to shoot at the convoy and cause it to split apart. 2 vehicles separated from the rest, and then, according to other wounded Nigerian soldiers, dozens of attackers arrived on motorcycle, fully encircling the Americans and the Nigerians. What the soldier was also telling us, though, was that he was quite surprised because, he says, the American Green Berets and their Nigerian counterparts arrived at his base on October 3rd, the day before the attack. He did not know where they were going. When he later got the orders to move out very quickly because they had to respond to the ambush, he said that he didn't understand why the U.S. and the Nigerians would have gone out in such a light convoy. And by that, he means not sufficiently manned, without sufficient manpower, given from at least his and his unit's perspective, the threat that existed within this zone. His own unit only goes out if they're able to amass a force of at least 80 to 100 soldiers, John.
All right, Arwa Damon for us in Niger. Important new information. The administration released most, but not all, of the classified files on the 1963 assassination of President John F. Kennedy. President Trump expressed his frustration with last-minute requests from several national security agencies, saying in a White House memo, "I have no choice but to accept those redactions rather than allow potentially irreversible harm to our nation's security." I want to bring back John Avlon and bring in CNN political commentator Errol Lewis. You know, of course, the president himself treated this a little bit like a game show or a reality show in the run-up to the revelation overnight. He said, big document release coming in days, finally going to learn these details. Then at the last minute, he pulls them back.
Yes, regretting all the while that he's got to sort of actually be president, not just kind of roll out this information, but actually take care of the very valid concerns that may be out there by national security agencies, saying that, well, you know, there's certain things we just don't want to release right now.
I'm not buying valid after 50 years, folks, right? I mean, first of all, they've had 25 years to prepare for this. The deadline didn't sneak up on them, and still it appears that they were trying to redact things at the last minute like a college student cramming for an exam.
And why is that? What, meaning
well, I think they've been in a degree of denial that this day would ever come because they figured they could convince a president not to keep delaying. There's clearly something embarrassing there, as well as some potential compromising information. But good for Trump for actually making this a priority. He appears to have had his hands sort of forced at the last minute, but there's a governmental impulse towards secrecy that overwhelms common sense very often when we actually see the documents they've been fighting to keep sealed.
John Avlon, the Roger Stone of morning television. Roger Stone, of course, the sometimes advisor to President Trump, famous political operative. He writes this this morning: the deep state boys will undermine the president's order by redacting and withholding as much information as they can. Unsealed JFK documents show the KGB thought that LBJ did it. That last one's a little kicker because, of course, Roger Stone's written books about this.
Yeah. I mean, you know, professional conspiracy theorist and former Trump advisor Roger Stone. But I agree with them on the impulse to keep things secret. I mean, you know, Pat Moynihan wrote a book on that too. It's a larger problem. I think, you know, he's also obviously trying to sell his book.
But what about the rollout? I'm just curious. Why were we all on tenterhooks for hours of waiting? The documents will come soon. What happened with the Trump rollout yesterday?
You know, it seemed to me like it was more of the sort of a game show than anything else. Yeah, I mean, the drama and so forth. But, you know, look, I think there's something to be said for not wanting to feed the beast, and the beast being the conspiracy theorists. Something like, I think 1%, maybe less than 2% of all of the possible documents have in fact been revealed.
Okay.
Now, if you've got, when you include things, as we've discovered in a different context, files that will be, you know, FBI files, CIA files, that are just, you know, sort of scraps of information, rumors, completely unconfirmed. There's one document that was released yesterday saying that, you know, some notion that LBJ was part of the Ku Klux Klan, which, if you know his politics, he was anything but that, even as a
Can we make the most awkward segue of all time here and talk about something else that happened with the administration yesterday, which was the president's opioid announcement, declaring it a public health emergency, not a national emergency, which there had been some suggestion he would, which means there's no new federal funding for it, but, Errol, a public health emergency which will refocus some federal resources and shine a spotlight on it.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, it's not nothing. The people who are complaining that, well, there should be, you know, billions of dollars, we should be able to raid FEMA and take money away from the rebuilding of Houston or the rebuilding of Puerto Rico in order to apply it to this, I think might be a little bit misguided.
Because it does get money. Federal funds are going to go to fight the opioid crisis?
Well, no,
not new money.
There'll be some retargeted money, and it'll free up some resources. But money is not the real problem here. You know, the fact that 100 people are dying every single day from these overdoses, you know, we've already heard some loose talk yesterday that I think suggests that we need this national conversation. When the president himself says, oh, yeah, this is one more reason we need the wall. Well, the wall is not how fentanyl is getting into, you know, West Virginia or New Hampshire, right? And so we've got to have sort of a rational conversation, figure out what the level of attack is going to be, and then and only then should you start talking about the money.
I know. The president campaigned on this. This is something that has been a crisis, but it's been snowballing for years, right? And the 90-day time period isn't sufficient because it took more than 90 days to get where we are, which is an outright epidemic in terms of deaths. It has nothing to do with border crossings per se. These are drug dealers wearing lab coats and have taken advantage of pill mills in small towns, particularly in the industrial Midwest. And an ad campaign along the lines of just say no isn't going to do the job either. But this does need a concerted focus, and it's frankly overdue.
Well, look, so many people and so many families are struggling with this crisis. And the president talked about how addiction affected his life and his family. So let's listen to that moment.
I had a brother, Fred, great guy, best looking guy, best personality, much better than mine. But he had a problem. He had a problem with alcohol. And he would tell me, don't drink, don't drink. He was substantially older, and I listened to him and I respected, but he would constantly tell me, don't drink. He'd also add, don't smoke. But he would say it over and over and over again.
That's such an affecting moment because it's authentic and it's personal. And Trump's family has been touched by addiction in the story of his brother Fred. And it was also a little flash of self-deprecating humor, which is not the president's signature, but is highly effective when deployed.
But it's also just say no, which worked for President Trump. Which is great. I mean, it's terrific that he was able to abstain his whole life from alcohol, but it's been proven not to have been as effective for so many people over the generations since Nancy Reagan said it. You got to have other strategies as well to fighting drugs.
Well, we'll see what this changes. I mean, in terms of fighting this epidemic. And so many people did vote for President Trump. We've interviewed them because they thought that he would immediately try to do something. So yesterday.
Most people who kick chemical addiction don't go through any kind of a program. It's a really difficult kind of a question to try and tackle.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for the conversation.